So I thought I would share a little bit of the journey I went on with a guitar that I bought from Peach Guitars, the PRS Silver Sky SE. Perhaps you were a bit like me when you heard they were releasing the cheaper version, and you've always appreciated John Mayer's tone of his guitar. So I was quite intrigued, but really not taken with the colours that they released. What I did eventually was bite the bullet on a moon white one, the yellow one, really. And it arrived in fantastic condition, really nice construction, of course, and really nice rosewood board. And I set about making some changes to it. I wanted to refinish it. So this is a journey from moon white to chocolate, a sort of deep red. Let me talk you through it. This is the first time I've ever tried to do anything like this. So I just wanted to encourage really everybody to give it a go. This is not something that I am particularly skilled in. I would say that I'm quite meticulous in some things, and so I wanted to try and bring that into this, the first time trying a project like this. What I did initially was just go across the body of the guitar, taking measurements on things like the height of the bridge saddles, making sure that I could put it back together the way that I pulled it apart, looking at the neck pocket itself, making sure that when I put the neck back on, the neck pocket was really tight. This is a great example from PRS of a good quality neck pocket. And then I turned it over and I looked at the distance of the spring claw, the trem claw, just to make sure that I could screw it back in and get it pretty much flush with the body. And then of course the same with all the bridge saddles as well, just for intonation, so that it was ready to go. And so here is the stripped back body itself, with the volume and tone knobs taken off, of course, and the strings, and then the neck off, and it gives you a sense of what is underneath all the lacquer, this light poplar. So I had to buy some tools for the project, so I got a heat gun, just things off Amazon. I saw a range of videos online, and the heat gun seemed to be the quickest option. What I would say is that what I've learned is that it's not necessarily the best option, but it was the quickest option. So I got a heat gun, and I also got some protective eyewear, and of course something to protect from the fumes as well, a little bit like a really bad Halloween costume. And then here we have it. I laid it all out on a heat resistant mat outside and was ready to go. So I set the heat gun going and began to literally burn off the lacquer and the paint. And as you can see, it did come off pretty easily. It flaked off. But what it did do was it left little scorch marks all across the poplar. The poplar is so light and so soft that even as I was scraping, it was damaging the body. So it's hard, I think, to do it really perfectly. But it turned out fine. All in, it turned out fine. I did offer, just jokingly offer the old finish online. Nobody wanted to buy that, funnily enough. But I thought actually the old finish, after it had been charred, looked far better than the moon white. Personal preference there. So that is the front of the body as it was finished. Again, you can see there are some scorch marks on there, but all in all, it came out fine. It was a 5-piece body, which really doesn't matter to me, in the sense that it was going to be refinished and covered anyway. All the pieces were put together really well. There was no gapping, so I was quite relaxed about the next phase. I taped off with frog tape just certain parts of it because I wanted to have the front a different finish to the sides and the back. That was the original plan, and also have a little bit on the cutaway of the arm there, the arm curve. I was going to try and stain that a different colour as well. I had seen online that people were doing this with Angelus leather dye, so I bought a chocolate leather dye for the project, and it turned out really quite nice. I put a few coats just with a rag on the body, but what I found was that actually when I took the frog tape off, it had sort of stained through and leaked through a bit, so I gave up on the idea to have that curve, the arm curve, a different shade, and I just stained the whole thing instead. And after several coats, perhaps too many coats to be honest, it turned out like that, quite nice, darker than I anticipated, but as you'll see when I applied the lacquer, the colour ended up a little bit different. Here is the lacquer I used. I think there's something humorous about that flawless lacquer, but it really depends on how you apply it. So I applied a few coats and was really pleased with how it turned out on the front. It had a lovely sheen to it, and it was going on really quite well. I sprayed, I think, maybe 4 coats on the front, and just over a few days, just letting it dry. And then I went to spray the back and had a bit of a disaster, to be honest, because the lacquer ran over the back and onto the front. So I had to basically go back to, not to quite to square one, but I had to sand back parts of the front and re-lacquer the front and rethink what I was going to do about the back. I didn't want to go through that again. It was quite a stressful experience. So I opted to not lacquer the back and the sides, but to actually, my initial plan was to tongue oil them, and I then moved on to a varnish instead. What I loved about it was the contrast that it was creating between the lacquered front and the back and sides. It went through a whole host of iterations. It looks a little bit like a lovely dessert. It looks quite edible actually. But what you can see is that because I put so much stain on the poplar body, it ended up, I just couldn't get the stain out of certain parts. So that really influenced what I was going to do next. But the contrast was looking great between the front, the lacquered front, and the unlacquered sides. And I was really quite pleased with it. Initially I planned to leave the other cutaway, this sort of signature PRS cutaway on the front, the smaller horn, leave that light, but I just could not get it right, and I couldn't get rid of this really strange marking on the wood. It was like a Z, you can probably see that in the pictures there. I couldn't get rid of it no matter how much I sanded back, so I bought a Furniture Clinic wood stain. I actually bought a few different shades. I bought a walnut, a rosewood, and one other, and I stained the back and sides with that instead. And I used a varnish actually, and I stained the varnish and then applied the varnish onto it. And it turned out really much nicer than the unfinished or partially finished back and sides. So here's a video of it. What I would say is finished. It's not perfect. I'm not totally happy with it. Well, I'm happy enough with it. I certainly think it looks better than the moon white. And so I've found my peace with what I've managed to do. So there it is. Just to encourage you to, if you're on the fence about giving this a try, when I priced this, I was quoted at about 450 UK pounds to do this. This project cost me about £100 in materials and about 4 days, probably all in, of time. So I understand why they were wanting to charge £450 because of the labour, the whole process of it. But just to encourage you that I started with no experience and ended with a product that is fine. I'm pretty happy with it, and ultimately it sounds great, it plays great, and it feels great. So give it a go. What's the worst that could happen?